There's always that extra ta-da. Hello, everybody. Welcome to the Atheist Experience. We are live and later than usual. So if you're shocked and awed, we specifically moved this show so it happened right after you got out of church. No, that's actually not true. We are live. It's February 21st, 2010. I'm your host, Matt Dillahunty. Joining me this week, Martin Wagner. And we have a special guest joining us, Dr. Darrel Ray. Thanks a lot for being here.
Thanks for inviting me.
Dr. Darrel Ray is the author of The God Virus, How Religion Infects Our Lives and Culture. We'll be talking to him more about this book. For those people who aren't familiar with the program, this is a live public access television program sponsored by the Atheist Community of Austin, a nonprofit educational organization promoting positive atheism and the separation of church and state. The ACA has weekly meetings every Sunday at Romeo's on Barton Springs Road, beginning around 11:30 or so, except for the first Sunday of each month when we host our lecture series at the Austin History Center, located at the corner of 9th and Guadalupe. For more information about the Atheist Community of Austin, you can visit the website www.atheist-community.org, and there you'll find our calendar of events, frequently asked questions page, and contact information. For those people who don't actually get through on the telephone today, you can email tv@atheist-community.org, and that goes to myself, the co-host, some of the people behind the scenes. I'm going to try and keep the announcements as short as possible today so we can spend a good time with Darrel today. In addition to this program, the ACA also sponsors a bi-weekly internet audio podcast called The Non-Prophets. That's Prophets, and you can go to nonprofitsradio.com for more information about that. We'll be live again this coming Saturday. And normally we go to dinner after the show's over at Threadgill's, but because we're starting late, we actually went to dinner before the show, although we didn't really get drunk. We thought about it. But we decided not to.
You wouldn't be able to tell.
Yeah, you wouldn't notice a bit, I'm sure. So thanks to everybody who decided. Originally, the show is on normally every Sunday from 4:30 to 6 p.m. On public access television, cable channel 16 here in Austin, and we stream it live over the internet. We also record the program and post it after the fact. And this week there was training going on here at the public access studio, and they were going to cancel us entirely, which would have been a disaster because this is the week that Darrel Ray was in town and we wanted to make sure we got him on the show. So we scheduled this special late episode. We'll have the number posted up for you shortly, and we'll be taking calls. But first of all, I wanted to welcome you to the show, and we'll talk a little bit about the book, but I thought we might start by getting a little background, your history, both with respect to religion, and also you were a psychologist.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I'm an organizational psychologist now. I was a clinical psychologist the first 10 years of my career, but I moved into organizational psych and I've been there for like the last 25 years or so, and travel around the country working with corporations and that sort of stuff. That's the way I make my real, it's my real job. I make my living. So, but I started out on the religion side. You're interested in that, I assume. Raised in a fundamentalist home. My parents eventually, as they became retired, became missionaries. I mean, it was that strong. My grandfather on my father's side was a country church minister for 40 years. My grandfather on my mother's side was elder. So all sorts of Sunday school teachers and ministers, cousins, I mean, all sorts of people like that in my family. Super, super religious. Mm-hmm. And was married in a fairly fundamentalist environment when I first got married many, many years ago. And just went off, got a bachelor's degree, got a master's degree in religion, and decided that just wasn't working for me too well. So I went on to get a doctor's in psychology and tried to stay as liberal as possible in my religious leanings until finally got divorced and didn't have to stay in that religious setting any longer. Yeah.
And when did you actually manage to escape from religion? Or?
I was pretty much an agnostic, I think, by the time I was 35 years of age, and probably an atheist by the time I was 40, but certainly didn't advertise it. I mean, I was still raising kids. I had fundamentalist parents, grandparents, ex-in-laws. I mean, lots of consequences for doing that, so I just tried to stay real low-key.
And that's something that I definitely want to talk about. I want to make sure we talk a little bit about this particular book because it's a subject that I find interesting. But before we're done, in addition to possibly taking calls, look, I've disappeared because we've gone to black. Mm-hmm. We'll also be talking a little bit about escaping from religion, recovering from religion.
Right.
And I know that's a subject that is very important to a lot of our listeners and viewers, because I get lots of email with these questions, and I think that
Right,
what
yeah.
you're doing in this area is incredibly important, so I can't wait to get to that. But you mentioned, the book is The God Virus, and you liken religion to a virus in a computer sense or a biological sense, or both, kind of?
Both, both. Computers get viruses. This is a computer. It can get viruses too. Now, I look at viruses primarily as negative, as parasitic, as harmful to the organism it invades.
Sure.
That computer virus gets into your computer. It wants to do bad things to your computer and then move on to the next computer, if you will. Well, there's other kinds of ideas that seem to act and look like computer viruses. And if you think about it, the Catholic Church is got a whole set of instructions. The Protestant Church, Baptist Church, Islam, they have a set of instructions that they want to infect your brain with at a very early age. In fact, if they don't get you early in your lifetime, they're probably not going to get you at all. So almost all religions put a huge emphasis on infecting people as soon as they're born and keeping them infected for a lifetime, if you will. So that's kind of the gist of, there's a lot more to the book, obviously, but that's kind of the gist of it. How do people get infected with this, and why do they stay infected for a lifetime? Even educated people, why do they get infected and stay infected?
What's the answer?
In 30 words or less.
You'll have to make sure that you work your way through the book. Now, also you talked about, and I missed out on today's lecture because of transportation issues, but you were here with CFI at the Austin History Center and talked about some of this. You mentioned before how religions make use of guilt.
Yes, right.
And human needs and desires in order to propagate. I wonder if you might talk a
Well,
little about that.
When you're a young child, you get told don't put your hand in the cookie jar. So you put your hand in the cookie jar, despite your mom's warning, and you get your hand slapped. But that cookie sure tasted good, didn't it?
Right.
Well, the next day your mom's not around. So you put your hand in the cookie jar, you eat it, and it still tastes good, but then you get this little twinge. You know, Mom told me not to do that. A little twinge. We call that twinge guilt. And in psychological terms, it's cognitive dissonance. Here's the rule, you broke the rule. You express that dissonance through guilt. That's a normal cycle. I call it the guilt cycle. In the book, I spend a whole chapter talking about how does the guilt cycle work. Well, religion comes along and says, aha, if we teach you to be guilty about something, then we've got you for life because you've got to come back to us to get forgiveness for that guilt. Well, it may be something that, you know, in a different religion, what if I would belong to a religion that expected you to put your hand in the cookie jar before the meal and eat it? Then I wouldn't be guilty about putting my hand in the cookie jar and eating it. I would be guilty if I didn't put my hand in the cookie jar and eat it.
Right.
Religions, from one religion to the next, will teach different guilt functions. But no matter what, the guilt always comes back to that particular God virus's teaching. Different cultures use guilt in different ways. For example, the Hawaiian culture, before Western religions got there, put a lot of issues and emphasis on guilt related to foods, but not around sex. Hawaiian culture, marriage was a very loose structure, and whether you had sex before you were married, after you were married, or how many sexual partners you had was pretty much irrelevant. But do not eat this food on Thursday morning at 3 o'clock. Just don't do that. And women couldn't eat certain foods during menstruation. Children could never eat certain foods. Adult men could only eat certain foods. Lots of taboos and rules around foods, but nothing around sex, or very little around sex, until the American missionaries got there. What'd they do? Said, you guys better put your clothes on or God's going to kill you. And lo and behold, they didn't put their clothes on, and 3 weeks later, people started dying of smallpox. So that makes that God look pretty powerful, right? So people start getting dressed, putting clothes on, because these missionaries their God's going to kill you if you don't do it. And so this starts breeding guilt into them. First thing any religion does, any major religion, whether it's Islam, Christianity, Mormonism, almost any of the major religions, first thing it does is create guilt especially around sex and sexuality. That's a huge thing for all these religions, because we're going to do it.
Oh, yeah.
And religion knows you're going to do it, so let's make you feel guilty about it.
It seems like a structure that's designed, and I'm not a psychologist, but to create a dependency.
Absolutely, right.
And I can the food stuff is something that we might laugh at because it's unfamiliar to us. And yet, when you look at it from kind of a more objective perspective, it's not really any more ridiculous. And I'm wondering how the major religions came to be so fascinated with sex as their tool.
Because it works.
Yes.
Because it works. Now, if you look at the Jewish religion, it has quite a few food rules. And not as many, in some ways, not as many rules around sex as the Protestant religions, the Islam, Catholicism. There's not quite as much there. So even within Western culture, we can see differences by religion. But the nice thing about sex is everybody's going to do it. And if we can make people feel guilty about it, we can propagate. We can spread our religion all over the place through what I call the guilt cycle, injecting people with lots of guilt. Now, Judaism is plenty of guilt, and plenty of guilt even around sex in some ways, but not nearly as much as the Catholic or the Protestant religions have.
In some ways, this seems counterintuitive, doesn't it? Because you would think, okay, yeah, everybody has sex occasionally, and pretty much when you have it, you like it. Mm-hmm. So you would think that the most successful religions in the world would be sex religions, right? Where everyone was having just phenomenal orgies and having a great time.
Yeah.
Simply because everyone enjoys sex. But so it seems counterintuitive that the way to have, at least in the West, very successful religious, moral, I mean, it's a loaded word, but the brainwashing,
right,
in terms of what you think is moral or not, is to have very strong prescriptions against something that most people would consider to be one of the most enjoyable activities in life.
Right, yeah.
And that's a little baffling, isn't it?
It is. Well, it's not baffling when you realize what the God virus is trying to do. It's trying to find the best way to infect you and your progeny. Because the most efficient way to manipulate and perpetuate a religion is from generation to generation. Parents raise their kids. You get the God virus from your parents. In fact, in my talk today, I talked about God viruses are sexually transmitted. I mean, religion is a sexually transmitted disease. You get it from your parents, and you get it because of so much emphasis is put on that. Man, we got off on sex real early in this program. What are we going to talk about the rest of the time?
This group is preoccupied with sex, and so we tend to get there.
I'm sorry.
None of us really know what foreplay is. We just want to rush right in. As a reminder, the phone lines are open. We can go ahead and put the number up. We're going to continue having the discussion here, but as a reminder that people watching, we are a live call-in show. We'll be taking calls, and you can. We'd appreciate it if you could direct them specifically to the book and the topics here. But we're not afraid. You can bring on questions about all kinds of stuff, and we'll give Darrel his trial by fire here today.
It gets back to the question of dependence. Because I think religion, has found it necessary in order to perpetuate itself to make people dependent upon the religion.
Right.
So, as George Smith talks about in his book, Atheism Case Against God, religion seems to have, and especially the major monotheisms, right, Christianity, Islam, a vested interest in things like guilt and unhappiness and human misery. The whole, Amazing Grace,
yes, right.
Who saved a wretch like me.
Yeah.
This whole idea of the program seems to be beat down the personal esteem of the individual, a person's self-esteem, so that specifically that self-esteem can then be reconstructed from the ground up. But now the religion is at the center of it.
Exactly. Right.
Do you need to go that far, though? Do you need to go to a point where you've beaten down the self-esteem and things, or do we,
not necessarily,
just as humans, have enough faults that are exploitable and concerns that are exploitable that you never have to do the breakdown part?
Yeah.
Right.
It's enough to just instill the guilt, right? This whole idea of I don't think Mom saw me reach into the cookie jar, but if she did, right. What could happen?
We internalize Mom's instructions. Mom said that's bad. We internalize it. When we violate the rule, we feel guilty. The same thing's going on. You internalize the rules of the local religious culture, whatever that is, and then when you violate the rule, you feel guilty. Now, when I was growing up, we were taught and taught and taught. Sex before religion, sex before marriage.
Sex before religion was awesome.
Sex before marriage is wrong. You're going to burn in hell if you do that. I was taught that over and over again. But can't tell you how many of the kids in our church had sex before marriage or got pregnant before. So it doesn't work. But that's not the issue. Religions really don't care that they don't want you to stop having sex. They want you to feel guilty as hell about it.
Right.
Because the only place you're going to feel relief from the guilt is to come back to this particular God virus. So if you're raised a Baptist, you have to come back to the Baptist church to get the forgiveness. Because Baptists don't go confess to the local priest. They never do that.
No.
Catholics don't come and go to Sunday school to get relief from their Catholic guilt. So it always brings you back to a very specific God virus. And that's the beauty of this system. It's guilt-driven, and it brings you back to that specific one you learned as a child.
Yeah. But again, it still seems funny that so much guilt and negativity would be associated with something that is, inherently pleasurable.
Yeah.
And I think, that, and one thing I've noticed about, if you want to look back into the history of religion, at least in America, you want to talk about like the Puritan societies, the very first colonists who came over here. Now, of course, they had really strict, very theocratic rules. But what's interesting is that within marriage, if you were married and you weren't having enough sex, then they'd get upset with you for that. You could get in some real trouble in these Puritan communities in the 1600s, if you and the wife weren't, at least fairly regular in your, connubial bliss, right?
Right.
And so it's not necessarily so much, well, certainly it's guilt towards sex, but it's guilt towards the non-approved sexual practices that are specifically endorsed by the religion. If you're procreating to create more little believers for the religion, and you're doing it within a marriage structure, that's great. It's just 8 times a day, and we'll bring the candy just to make sure, and flowers and whatever. But anything other than that is just no. It's not just sex. They want sex to serve a specific function that again benefits the religion.
Right.
So I'm not completely sure that I'm in complete agreement with you on one point, and I'd like to get you to kind of address this as the arbiter.
Okay.
No, you mentioned how it seemed kind of counterintuitive that we might feel guilty over something that would be viewed as pleasurable. And while you were saying that, I was thinking about how we do tend to feel guilty. If you're having too good a time, and it's, I think, because we empathize with others. So the question is, does the guilt come naturally to us because we're empathetic, or is that guilt something that is a sideline that has been taught, I guess, or infused into this? I mean, is there a possibility to be empathetic and happy without any guilt over it, or are we just destined as creatures we're going to feel guilty about stuff?
I don't think guilt is built right in. You have to learn guilt. And you have to learn a pattern of behavior around guilt. And different cultures have different guilts, if you will. So if, for example, one of the things I talked about today was the concept, or the idea, the behavior of masturbation, which all primates do and all humans are going to do. But isn't it interesting that almost every major religion has sanctions about masturbation? It's wrong, and you're going to burn in hell if you do it. The Catholics are very clear about that. And the Protestants, most Protestant religions, while they're not as clear about it, certainly come out against it, if you will. And lots of other religions do that too. So why would a religion prohibit something that is absolutely going to happen anyway? There's no way to prevent it. So that tells us that religion's got a different motive. There's a hidden agenda there. And that's, you have to learn to be guilty about something, and you have to learn it from the religion. Once you learn it, then you have to come back to the religion to relieve yourself of the guilt.
Right.
You're going to do it. Every primate does it. Almost every human. Albert Ellis was fond of saying, the great psychotherapist, he was fond of saying that 97% of men will admit to masturbating, and the other 3% are lying. I don't know. He never said anything.
Or maybe
about
the other way
women.
around, like 3% will admit, and the other 97%. I don't do that.
Well,
really.
Yeah. But either way, and women do it too. There's no doubt about that. If you know something's going to happen and you can teach people to feel guilty about it, then you got a perfect cycle to bring people back into that particular God virus. It's a beautiful system. It works perfectly.
It's interesting, though. We should make the distinction, of course, that the things that religion wants us to feel guilty about, such as normal sexual pleasures or normal sexual development as adolescents, when you will experiment with things like masturbation and whatever, and these are not necessarily, these are hardly ever things that genuinely are harmful, the things that religion, because in certain situations, guilt can be a perfectly good thing, right? Sure. I mean, there are genuinely bad acts that human beings can commit, and you get caught, so if you steal something from a store or something like that, you get caught, you feel guilty about that, and hopefully the guilt helps you to rehabilitate and learn that lesson. Oh, I shouldn't be a thief. I shouldn't do this or that or the other crime.
Right.
So there are good ways to apply guilt. But what religion does is it focuses on things that when you think about it, it's like, well, why, how is that relevant to anything? You know, these are, you know, how is this a harm?
Right.
You know?
Yeah.
And even, and that's not to say that there are, I'm sure there are out there in the world, probably psychologically and physically unhealthy sexual practices, but masturbation's not one of them.
Right. Right.
You know, and just not being married when you have sex with another consenting adult certainly isn't one of them.
Right.
And yet all of these things religion wants to tie guilt to.
Right.
You know, and that's funny. So I think it's maybe because religion wants to be the source of happiness in your life, it has to immediately declare all other sources of happiness in your life competition and perhaps.
Well, as I just really described in great detail in the book, always look at the virus as trying to perpetuate itself. The God virus wants to perpetuate, just like the coal virus wants to perpetuate itself, or the HIV virus, or the gonorrhea bacillus wants to perpetuate itself. It doesn't care about you. It cares about perpetuating itself. The most efficient way to perpetuate is the one it's going to choose if it possibly can. And God viruses are constantly mutating, constantly trying to change to perpetuate within whatever culture they're in, just like the swine flu is constantly mutating, or just like the HIV is constantly mutating. So once you understand that God viruses want to just go from one host to the next, what's the most efficient way? Make you feel guilty about something you're going to do anyway. So use that God virus to assuage the guilt. Now what you're going to go out and do is that same behavior. But then you're going to teach your children sex before marriage is wrong, don't do it, and feel guilty as hell about it if you do it, and come back to this church to get your guilt assuaged. It's a beautifully efficient system. And it works so many ways for all religions, whether it's Islam or Hinduism or even Buddhism. There's a lot of sexual guilt around Buddhism. Christianity, obviously, Catholicism, you name it, they've discovered at some point that this is a great way to infect, just like sexually transmitted diseases like gonorrhea, or any venereal diseases, has discovered that sexual contact is a great way to infect.
Right. It's the neat trick that they discovered.
Yeah. Right.
Just to let people know, for those people wondering why we're having these crazy background issues and stuff, the computer that takes care of our internet stream is having difficulties. So if you're watching the stream, that's why it's not doesn't look particularly good for you. And they're working on it, and we'll take care of it, and we'll get to calls shortly. One of the things about religion as a virus and the neat tricks that we were talking about is that there's also limits. And for a religion that attempts to be too good, and for example, you might have the particular Puritan religions that are so imposing about sex that they kill off all of their, there's nobody left to pass on along the religion.
Or like the Shakers, who would prohibit sex.
Yes. And so when you're talking about these, I guess what we're looking at now in the modern religions is in much the same way when we look at the animal kingdom. These are the survivors. These are the ones that have come through, that have managed to learn the neat tricks that allow them to propagate. And the difference here, of course, is that these aren't entities. They're concepts and ideas, and we can identify what's wrong with them. I mean, you've done it with the God virus. We've done it here with regard to the classical arguments for the existence of God, or somebody may call in to explain things. What is it about the virus that makes it so pernicious in protecting itself from criticism, which other people would think is just obvious, absurdly obvious?
You could ask the same question about HIV. What makes HIV so pernicious and capable of mutating and propagating itself in the biological world? The same principles are happening. It creates a method to protect itself and inject itself into the next person. We can take this metaphor to extremes sometimes, and it works. I was shocked as I was writing the book how well it works. A virus like HIV has to have a key in order to unlock your cells and go into it, to inject its own DNA and propagate itself using the mechanisms of reproduction inside of the cell. If you've got antibodies floating around inside of you that know that HIV is bad or whatever rhinovirus or whatever virus is, what it will do is it will take that antibody, will glom on to the key, if you will, to prevent it from being able to inject itself into the cell. Religions do the same way, same thing. Religion has to have a key in order to get into you. And so you will be given the virus when you're very young, because that's when you're most susceptible. You're most susceptible to religious viruses when you're young, or rhinoviruses when you're young, or that's what, or any other kind of virus. We get viruses
when you're
a lot.
old.
Or
When your immune system is starting to fail.
right, right.
And we see that with religion too.
Yes, and I call it the rational immune system versus the biological immune system. They're both working. And you and I as adults, we have a rational immune system against all sorts of crazy ideas out there. I mean, I'm not running out grabbing the Scientology books and giving money to Scientology, because I got the immunities to that. Mormons can't. I'm immune to the Mormons, but I was raised a fundamentalist Christian. That's the one group that can get to me. They know the keys, and I was raised with a keyhole, so to speak, in myself, where they can inject their DNA constantly. And so it's really difficult when a person's been raised in something, because the virus has just made a path into your brain to keep you from leaving that, and it's programmed you. And we can almost look on in some of the research and see that people do really, their brains, their whole way of structuring their world is changed based on which God virus they were taught early on. Mm-hmm. And it's very difficult to change that later. And once it's like a lot of ideas. You can't teach an old dog new tricks kind of an idea.
Right.
Once you get that set in your brain, it's hard to extract it. And you are programmed to propagate, to go out and find new people to infect that. And the first person you're going to infect is your children. And the rest are going to be your family. You build a whole social structure around it.
As a reminder to everybody, we're here with Dr. Darrel Ray, author of the book, The God Virus, How Religion Infects Our Lives and Culture. We're going to start taking calls now because we've already got callers on the line who had questions for Dr. Ray. And we'll just go ahead and get started and see how it goes. We've got Leo in Wales.
Yes, hi. Can you hear me?
Yes, we can.
Yeah, how are you?
Yeah, good, thanks. Thanks very much for the show, because it's quite inspiring in many ways.
Thanks very much for calling in at the late time, or early for you.
Yeah, late for us, but it's worth it, I think. Yeah, for Dr. Darrel Ray, you're talking about this metaphor of religion or God being a virus. In your research or your book, have you come up with anything to suggest what the metaphoric antidote is, or how we should deal with this kind of virus?
Well, I've got several things I talk about in the book, but first of all, good to hear from Wales. It's one of my favorite places on earth, is North Wales around Ruthin. Are you familiar or close to there?
No, Cardiff. So.
Oh, Cardiff. I've been to Cardiff. Yeah. Yes, beautiful, beautiful area. Well, I get this question almost every time I speak about the God virus, is how do you treat it? Well, first of all, you don't treat it by telling people they're stupid for believing in whatever God virus they have. And that's one of my pet peeves, that we as non-theists, I'm assuming you're a non-theist. If you're not, I'm sorry.
No, it's okay. If I were to define myself, I've seen Matt define themselves as well a few times. There's atheists, and I think I would put myself under the anti-theist category.
Okay.
Because I would also perceive there to be some harm in religion itself, in the various claim of a God and not dealing with reality, and the consequences of, say, allowing certain authorities to propagate the idea that it's okay to not use condoms in sub-Saharan Africa. I
well
think
said, yeah.
The physical harm for us.
Yeah. Well, answer to your question, though, how do you treat it? First of all, I don't think it's my duty on the face of this earth to treat other people for their God virus. And if I take it upon myself to try and convert everybody, I'm really not behaving any different than the religionists are behaving. They try to convert me to their particular religion. I'm not trying to convert them to atheism. I'm trying to keep them out of my life and out of my politics. That I try to do. I try to raise my kids or whatever people I'm involved with to let them know where I stand, but it's not my job to convert the rest of the world. And I think when we get on our kick about we're here to convert you to think like we think, we're really not doing much different than the religionists are doing to us.
I agree with you, but can I perhaps take a semantic view on this? You're absolutely right. It's not my job or your job or anyone's job to convert someone to atheism. But if their belief is actively harming our world,
Right.
isn't there a point where we can actually stop and say, well, actually, no, we have a right to stand up and say what you believe should not follow the laws and legislations and moral conducts and behaviors. We should not tolerate it in our society. We should not allow you to impose those beliefs on us.
I entirely agree, and I'm the first one out there to protest. And by the way, I'll be speaking to the Irish Atheist Convention in July, and they've got the new blasphemy laws, so I'd appreciate any donations to my bail fund if I could. But I agree. We need to be out there protecting our rights and asserting our rights. I have a bit of a concern, though, when we interact with people we're close to, like our brothers and sisters and friends and relatives. Is it our job to convert them, and how do we interact with them? And I actually spend several chapters towards the end of the book talking about, well, how do you interact with these people? And one of the lessons I try to convey in the book is that logic is not the answer. You cannot argue somebody out of their religion. So stop doing it. It just creates more discontent in the relationship. The focus should be, as we interact with people we love and care about, the focus should be more on how do I influence that person rather than how do I convert that person. Because in fact, they're trying to convert you. They want you to become a Christian or Episcopalian or a Pentecostal. I don't care if they convert to me. What I do care is they stay out of my business. Don't tell me who I can sleep with, when I can have sex, what I can eat, what is taught in my schools. I think people should not be imposing their religious viewpoint on me, and I'm very assertive about that. So I distinguish between the political social world. Are we going to teach our kids that the world's 6,000 years old? That I'm concerned about, just like you are. But I'm also concerned about how do I relate to my family, my friends, my neighbors? How do I influence them rather than convert them? If that makes sense.
And sometimes there's nothing you can really do to control how the other people will respond. There is a distinction to be drawn between proselytizing, on the one hand, trying to convert someone openly, and the simple act of free and open discussion, criticism, debate, having a show like we have where you talk about the subject of religion, you talk about atheism, you offer alternatives to religion, people call, you argue with them over the phone. That's different. But the problem is, one thing that I think about, one of the defense mechanisms, if you will, of the God virus is it's very, very resistant even to that level of discourse, even that bit of inoculation. And this is why you hear, atheists, for example, Dawkins, if you listen to him talk and you read his books and you've seen him in person, yeah, he's a bit of a firebrand, but he's really, he's an English gentleman of the old school. But everywhere you hear Christians talking about him, he is apparently this rabid, frothing at the mouth, polemicist, angry, militant is the word that is often used. Apparently, in order to be militant and an atheist, all you have to do is write a book or have a blog. If you're religious and you want people to call you militant, you have to blow stuff up and shoot people. So there's a bit of a disconnect there. And all you can do is just try to present your ideas as rationally and as openly as you can and make sure the other person knows that what you're doing is you're inviting discourse. And even then, you have to be aware that they are probably going to immediately be like, you're evil, you're militant atheist, go away, bad. So they're going to respond to that, and I think that's probably the defense mechanisms of the virus kicking in.
Absolutely, very much so.
I would agree with you, if I may, because I'm aware that I'm infringing on other people's time as well. But if I look at what Dawkins and Sam Harris are saying, especially when they talk about the circles around protection and the way they divvy up different types of religious people from the fanatic to the most liberal, I think what they're alluding to here is saying that, well, if you talk to someone and try to influence them, they automatically can step back and shift the goalpost into a more liberal position and distance themselves from the more fanatical position. And so you end up saying, well, look, your position causing harm. And they say, well, that's not me, that's the fanatics. And you end up with well, I don't know how to tackle that.
That's true. It's like trying to hold Jell-O in your hand. It just kind of squeezes out, doesn't it?
Yes. And this is what I mean. If there is a way, another mechanism to deal with this so-called virus, metaphorically, then what's the procedure? I mean, okay, I understand that you're saying, well, we have to not get people's backs up and not deal with it maybe on the rational level and maybe not belittle the ideas. I know Tracy did a brilliant research about this a few episodes back about how atheists become atheists for the rational and religious people become religious for the emotive reasoning. So I can see that completely. I've encountered that before. But I'm not sure that solves the problem in the sense that it still enables someone to move on into somewhere more defensible from their position, which is more liberal, but they're still funding. I can give examples in Europe where taxes to the church are still commonplace. In fact, German, Austria, Switzerland, you still pay taxes to the church, and therefore you're empowering the church to make a decision. And even if you take a liberal approach and you say, well, that's not me, that's the church, you funded them, you supported them, you helped them,
sure,
and you protected them by taking that liberal approach.
I'm just as much against that as any, and I'm happy if you're going to go out there and protest it and vote against it and do whatever you need in a democratic society to stop it. But that's different than dealing with friends, relatives, and loved ones and how we interact with those folks and coworkers and that sort of thing. That's the two realms I try to talk about in the book. I don't think there's a solution to this problem, Leo, but I think there's a way to approach it, and that's what I try to talk about.
And now, jumping in real quick, because this is an area where I'm not sure exactly how much in agreement you and I are on this. I think we're mostly in agreement in that I don't go around knocking door to door. People call us and we have the conversation here. But my take on it is I'm always a bit bothered when people say that that logic and reason is the wrong approach or is an approach we shouldn't use. I agree that you're not going to reason somebody out of something that more than likely they didn't use reason to believe in the first place. And yet I'm a living example of somebody who, because of logical arguments and reason and evidence and an increased understanding, gave up their beliefs. And because of doing the show and having these conversations, I hear all the time from people. There was an email just the other day of a guy that said, up until 3 months ago, I was a fundamentalist Christian, and it's because of things that I saw on your show or read from Dawkins, et cetera. Right. So I've always been an advocate of the kind of mini-pronged approach to this, that you need somebody like me who is going to be as in your face as you're possibly going to be. But with people calling me, I don't make outgoing calls. It's not like I'm knocking door to door saying, hey, you still believe in Jesus? I can fix that. But you also need... Sorry, what's that?
No, I said I completely agree and accept your approach. I think you've probably found the right balance of it. Yeah.
The thing is that I completely agree with Darrel with respect to family members and things. And I've been accused of being a hypocrite about this before. It's not that I don't care about my family members. I've had discussions with them, and we have come to an agreement that they know what my position is, and to some degree they understand my reasons. If they understood it entirely, I think they wouldn't be religious anymore. That's true. But and I understand what their position is, and we have kind of come to this agreement that for the sake of keeping the peace in the family, we're just not going to address these issues, and I'm fine with that. And I'm not in the position where I would ever. If somebody calls the show and reaches a point where they don't want to talk about this anymore because they're uncomfortable, that's fine. And you're all entitled to believe whatever nonsense you want. Where we definitely agree is that you need to keep your beliefs out of what the rest of us are allowed to do with regard to politics and law and things like that.
And I think what you bring up right there is when some of our phone calls with theists get to the point where they are uncomfortable with continuing the call, I think that is the moment where a little good has probably been done, because right there, that person is going to think about this call. And ultimately, the way to cure the God virus, if you want to know about treatment of it, each individual person, you've got to do your own work here. You have to do your own heavy lifting in the end in order to get where you need to be. And all we can do as unbelievers and as skeptics, rationalists, people who are very interested in what the truth actually is, and I think that that is a distinguishing characteristic of atheists, is that we need to be the people who care passionately about what really is and is not true. Regardless of whether a certain belief makes you feel good, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. To have a worldview that conforms to observable reality, I think is usually the best way to go about it. You've said that many times. When you get into a discussion with a theist, and we do this on our phone calls many times, you'll hear sometimes these little pauses in their answers. And that's them thinking about this stuff. They may stick with it. They may not, they may rationalize their way out of it. They may, go back to their preacher and get some canned responses from the Answers in Genesis website or whatever. But the point is, you mentioned this earlier with the whole, it sounds like, you'll talk to a Christian and they'll get to a certain point where they say, oh, well, that's not me. Don't think that I'm like them, because that's how what the fundamental, they're realizing that something you're bringing up is a problem for their belief system and their worldview. And they're responding to it nervously in that way because they know it's a problem. And so even if it seems like, well, they waffle, they backstep, they shift the goalposts, at least they're aware of something and they're thinking about it. And that's all you can do is plant that kernel, and then they have to do the rest of the work. They may never do the rest of the work, or they may. But
Leo, thanks a lot for calling. I'm going to try and move this on, and just for the guys in the control room. Cheers.
Thank you for the call, very much.
It's been great, and to help. Hopefully I'll catch you some other time.
Definitely.
Thanks. Keep up.
You won't have to stay up as late. I lost our server with the list of callers, so I'll give that another minute. This kind of dovetails into, we were talking about, how to approach family members, et cetera. But this issue of not so much how we deal with this, but once it's been dealt with, you have people who have perhaps lived the bulk of their lives with this particular virus, and now they are either cured or in the process of being cured. And what do we do to help them?
Right.
And this is something that you have kind of grasped by the horns and run with in your RR program.
Right, right.
So why don't you go ahead and tell us about that?
Well, shortly after I published the book, I started getting emails and phone calls from people saying, wow, I wish I'd have seen this book before, or I wish I'd have known this before, or I wish I'd had some help when I was getting out of religion myself. And it was amazing how many people, I did not write that book to convert anybody. I wrote that book to fellow non-theists so they could understand what was going on out there in the world, because I didn't see any books that were doing that. And I like Dawkins, Hitchens, Harrison, Dennett, but they're none of them psychologists, and they do not get in the heads of people, and they really don't tell how the gears work, if you will. So that's what I was focused on. But I started getting all these phone calls. I started getting all these emails from people saying, I need help getting out of religion, or I want to get out. I've gotten out of religion now. How do I deal with my mother-in-law? How do I deal with my spouse? She's still really religious. And how do I raise my children? Right. And I realized there's nobody out there offering that kind of help to folks. Right. So I started this group. I just announced it one week, and the next week 11 people showed up. And we heard the most amazing stories from people talking about how they were struggling with things like guilt from, just because you leave religion doesn't mean the guilt doesn't go. You were taught that from a really young age. Or how do I deal with my wife? We had one fundamentalist evangelical Baptist who was even a part-time preacher. He's now an atheist, but his wife's still very, very religious. And he came to our meeting and said, how do I deal with this? And that was a really interesting conversation. But we're getting those kinds of conversations. And I started saying, wow, lots of people need this. So we organized this group called Recovering from Religion, and it's recoveringreligionist.com on the internet. And we're trying to get leaders in all sorts of cities around the country. We have 20 groups now, leaders all over the country, convening these meetings once a month and letting people just sit down in a room and talk about what are the problems. How do you deal with your children? We had one guy come in and says, I have 10-year-old children. I've been raising them as Christians this whole time. Now I'm an atheist. Right. What do I do? It's going to be confusing to them. And I don't have the answers. And by the way, the people who are leading the meetings are just other people recovering from religion. They're not psychologists or social workers. They're normal people. But it's kind of like modeled on the AA model. It's self-help. We come together. We talk about these things. And the amazing ideas that came out of that were as good as any clinician probably would have come up with, I've noticed. So it's truly self-help, and these people are coming in, learning a little bit. When you hear a Mormon and an ex-Jehovah's Witness and an ex-Baptist all sitting in the room at the same time, and they're saying the same thing. It matters not what religion. You can see the God virus was working perfectly in all three of them, even though it's a totally different religion.
Right.
It's just amazing to watch that going on.
Now let me bounce something off you, because you mentioned just before that now Dawkins doesn't have your background in psychology as a professional, but it is from Dawkins that we have the concept of memes.
Oh,
and
yes,
memetics,
and I
which
jumped on that.
Sounds exactly like, and then we also, one of our co-hosts, Don Baker, some years ago did a lecture on what he called the Christianity meme.
Yes.
So I think that this idea has been explored. It seems like you've just gone into it, being a professional in the field, more in depth than anyone has before. And I'd like to, maybe to hear, say, how valid has, how on target was Dawkins when he thought of memes and memetics, and but what didn't he do with that idea well enough, perhaps, that you think could have really improved upon the concept more, so that we could understand a little bit better how the God virus, as you refer to it, works? Because my question about memes has always been, as a layman's perspective, well, how is it any more useful to think of these ideas? Let's say all throughout human civilization, people have had great ideas and you've had bad ideas. And it's sort of Darwinistic, right?
Very Darwinistic.
The good ideas catch on and they stick around, and the bad ideas get kicked to the curb. So how is it more useful then to come up with, say, this concept of memes or mind viruses or what have you, to think of these ideas above and beyond simply understanding them as, well, they were really good ideas and everybody liked them?
Oh, that's
very simplistic.
Very simplistic and inaccurate.
Right. Okay.
Why do hookworms survive in the guts of animals, and they survive for millions of years? Why do tapeworms? Why do other parasites, malaria? Why do they survive? They're certainly not good for the organism they're in.
They're good for themselves.
But they're good for themselves.
Okay.
The God virus is the same thing. It cares not for you. The God virus is so powerful in some ways that it can cause people to commit suicide. That's what suicide bombers do. It also can be so powerful as to get people to commit genetic suicide. That's what nuns and priests do. They're not allowed to propagate themselves. Now, if we had a disease running around the United States that caused people to no longer propagate, we'd be very concerned about that. Right. Well, that disease is called Catholicism. And it causes nuns and priests and other people sometimes not to propagate.
Although among the laity, they encourage big families.
That's the way the God virus works there, too. It goes both ways. Now, there's a way to understand this in fairly simple terms. There's three types of memes. And I don't think Dawkins or Dennett hits the nail on the head quite as well as I'd like them to. There's three types. And I don't want to get big into memetics. That's a whole study itself. But there are beneficial memes. Algebra is a beneficial meme. There are benign memes. The hula hoop, that was a benign meme. An idea that went wild and then died. And it's kind of come back in some areas. But it didn't help anybody that much. It didn't hurt anybody that much. Yeah. Then there's parasitic memes. That's the third kind. Parasitic memes infect your mind and take it over and do things that are bad for you and then try to get into the next person. There are memes that are not religions or are not seen as religions. For instance, in the book, I explore Marxism. Marxism was a very vicious parasitic meme, if you will. So it's not just, I think Marxism was actually a religion. If you look at the way it was structured, Lenin is entombed in Moscow, and people come by and worship him, literally. In North Korea, you got Kim Il-sung, who's president for life eternal, even though he's been dead for 20 years. That's pretty religious to me. It looks very much like a pharaoh who is now godlike after he dies.
Yeah, like objectivism with the Ayn Rand and the cult of personality.
Yeah, it just, if you look at the way Egypt did its pharaohs, Kim Il-sung and Lenin are the same way.
They're pharaohs.
Yeah, they're pharaohs. That's what it amounts to. So you can look at religion and realize that it's just a parasitic meme. It gives nothing, not a hoot about you. It just wants to get from you to your children, you to your next door neighbor, someone else. It's constantly pushing. It's constantly mutating, trying to get in. I don't know if that answers the question.
No, it does, actually. I mean, it helps is really how memetics and the idea of mind viruses are
Yeah,
different
right.
from just understanding ideas that are popular versus unpopular ones.
Right. For your viewers, if you don't want to read all of Dawkins, go read a little essay he wrote some years ago called "Viruses of the Mind." Just Google it,
Yeah.
and it's excellent, excellent read. That's what caused me to write this book. I'd read all this other stuff, but when I read "Viruses of the Mind," I thought, dang, I can take as a psychologist and really work this through and really expand it. He did not expand it. He didn't talk about how guilt works. He didn't talk what the infection strategy is. Because malaria has an infection strategy using mosquito to get from me to you. What's religion do? It has an infection strategy as well. And different religions have different infection strategies.
Right.
Yeah.
So Dawkins' premise was strong enough that you, as a psychologist, could take it and go, oh, yeah, there is something to work with
And
here.
it needed to be done.
Develop the idea.
Right. It needed to be developed, I thought.
Well, we've got our list of callers back, and I want to jump right into that. As a big reminder, though, we'll be live again next week at our regular time from 4:30 to 6 p.m. here on Channel 16, just like normal. This week we're at a delayed time because we were preempted for some training in the studio, but we managed to get a live time slot, so we thank you. Folks who are watching over the stream, who stayed up late or got up early, depending on where in the world you are watching the stream. And for the local people in Austin who may not be familiar with the show, this is the Atheist Experience, sponsored by the Atheist Community of Austin. We're on every Sunday, just not normally at this time. So for those of you tuning in for the first time, we appreciate it. And we've actually got a local caller, Richard. Are you there?
Hello, Richard.
Hello, Richard.
Yeah.
Okay. Okay, you're very quiet.
You're very quiet. You'll have to speak up.
Okay. Yes, I'm here.
Okay. We'll need a little more volume on the speaker.
Okay. Yeah, I just jumped into the program right now, so it was already going on when I turned on the TV.
Mm-hmm.
I heard the doctor saying about that he don't like anybody imposing their views, and I just wanted to ask him in regards to evolution. Does he believe that we evolved from monkeys?
Well, first off, evolution is not the belief that we evolved from monkeys. Evolution is a scientific discipline that studies biodiversity. It studies how simple life forms become more complex life forms, how species that are able to adapt have a better chance of surviving to the next generation than species that can't adapt. So that's an entirely different subject.
Well, I think I know where you're going with this. What was your actual question?
The doctor was talking about not accepting or doesn't like people to impose their views, and I wanted to ask the doctor in regards to that. Does it believe that we evolved from monkeys, which is taught in schools continuously? And I've seen,
You want the quick answer to that?
try evidence, and I haven't seen no evidence of it.
Well,
Then you haven't looked, but go ahead.
yeah. The short answer is we didn't evolve from monkeys specifically. Go read a little bit more and call back someday after you know a little more about evolution.
Yeah.
I think that the thing that he might have been getting to is this idea, because we oftentimes talk about things in simple terms because we don't want to explain for 20 minutes what we're talking about.
Yeah.
So when you say, I'd rather people didn't impose their beliefs on us, I think he was planning on going down the route that people who accept evolution are trying to impose that belief on people like him who don't accept evolution. And the answer is teaching people reality is not an imposition.
That's a good way to put it. Yeah.
Yeah, I mean, facts that inconvenience your ideology of choice, that's not the same thing as,
And somebody else here in Austin, we've got Lance on the line. Are you there?
Yes, I'm here.
Yeah,
How
we
you
can
doing?
turn that back down. I don't know what was wrong with Richard's phone.
it's probably
How you doing, Lance?
it's on a cricket phone, probably.
Hello?
Yes, I'm here.
Yeah, what's
How
your
you
question?
Yes, firstly, I just want to commend Matt. I think I've been watching him for a little while, and I think he's very intelligent, very smart, and very patient. I've been looking at, I've been seeing how, some theists present the same argument, and I can understand why you get frustrated. And hopefully, me being a theist. Hopefully you won't get as frustrated with me, but I just wanted to say that before I answer my question.
Boy, that's a long-winded way of making sure I'm nice to you. But we have a guest on the show, so what question have you got for us?
Won't necessarily work.
Well, I wanted to get you guys, what do you consider proof of God? Because I hear you, I noticed that you're pretty adamant about that, so I wanted to know, what did you consider actual proof?
Actually, I wouldn't be adamant.
Which God are you proving? Flying spaghetti monster or Zeus?
What'd you say?
Which God are you after? The flying spaghetti monster or Zeus or Neptune?
No, I'm not applying any religion to my question, just as a creator. I'm asking, what do you consider proof?
Well, first off, we would have to hear from the believer in that particular creator. We'd have to first have an understanding of what specific creator they wanted us to believe in. And then all we could do is respond to the evidence that they think is good, and they present it to us, and then we'll evaluate it. Usually what we ask on this program, and what Matt always asks, is when a theist calls or emails us or what have you, all right, please just tell us what you believe and then why you believe it. And then if the reasons you believe something, if they're good enough for you, then just give us those reasons, and we'll judge at that point.
Okay.
And not to be, I don't want to be overly pedantic, but you seem to be, you're using proof, and you're probably just using it in a colloquial sense. But I would never use that word. It's not. I don't seek proof in God. I seek evidence, and then you evaluate the evidence. And at some point, based on the type of claim it is and the nature of the evidence, you either have sufficient evidence to justify your belief, or you don't. And so I can't really say, I mean, people have asked before, what kind of evidence would it take for you to believe in, my particular God or the Christian God or whatever. We've come up with examples, and some people consider them outlandish. I don't even care to really do that anymore. The question is, what on earth would make anybody think that this is real in the first place? Clearly, I mean, I haven't seen the evidence for this, and every time I ask somebody to present evidence, what I get is anecdotes and logical fallacies. That's it. Those are the two things that show up. If there was something else, then I could maybe evaluate it. And it may be the case that there's not any evidence that could sufficiently demonstrate this, depending on the claim, because the claim is such that it couldn't possibly be true and couldn't possibly be demonstrated. But go back and, you can watch some of the stuff that Tracy's done, particularly with regard to, whether or not something manifests in reality. It is therefore testable, as we went over oh boy, I feel bad.
Well, can I say something real quick?
Sure, go ahead.
Yes. Now, I know, as far as evidence, I understand what you guys are saying. But, as far as existence is concerned, and I'm presenting this more as a question, as far as existence is concerned, some things exist that had not been proven to humanity for a while. For instance, just for shallow instance, people theorized that the Earth was flat, and there was no way to actually prove that or have evidence of it until later. But that didn't mean that it wasn't, flat.
Yes, Lance. And if God is in that category, then the time to believe that God exists is once there's been sufficient evidence. The time to believe, it doesn't matter if back 50,000 years ago, if some guy, running around killing lions thought the Earth was flat and somebody else said, nope, I think it's round. Well, he didn't have any evidence, so he wasn't justified in his belief. It doesn't matter that he happened to be correct. What matters was his belief supported by sufficient evidence? It could be, I suppose there's a possibility that there could be some God and that all these God people will turn out to be correct in some way. I'm sure that they'll all adopt the same one when it's proven. But you know what? They still weren't justified at the time they held those beliefs. They were still dishonest in representing those beliefs, and we were still completely justified in rejecting those beliefs until such time as the evidence became available.
I completely understand. Appreciate that.
All right.
Thanks, Lance.
All right.
Appreciate it.
Take care.
And now I'll be quiet for a minute.
Catch your breath.
Now we got Steve.
You were nice to that. I thought that was really awesome of you.
I answered that question the other day in email. I cheated. We got Steve in North Carolina. How are you?
It's all right.
How's it going?
What have you got for Dr. Ray?
Okay, I actually got two questions. I'm going to try to go through them quickly because I know you guys don't got much time. But all right, first of all, I understand where you're coming from about God in religion being sort of virus to modern society. I was wondering if you agree that if religion was sort of a primary catalyst for early man to form civilization.
I didn't quite catch that last sentence.
Oh. I'm sorry.
A catalyst
I was wondering
for what?
if you agreed if religion acted as a primary catalyst for forming civilization.
Okay.
I think ideas and a number of different ideas have helped that. I'm not sure religion specifically. I mean, think about what we call religion today is not what people experienced 5,000 years ago. Tribal religions were identified with the people of the tribe. For example, in the Cherokee Nation, you could not become a Cherokee religionist if you wanted to. It was impossible. In Amazon, you've got religions in the Amazon that are totally identified with a specific group. And I write about in the book, when did that happen? When did the breakout happen when there was no longer an identity of the religion with the tribe? And that happened sometime around 600 BC, maybe earlier, with Zoroastrianism. The first time any religion divorced itself from the culture it was in. And that was a revolution, and I've really not seen too many people write about this before. Did that help spur civilization? Well, I'm not so sure it did, because the Egyptians were doing pretty well before that, and they had a state religion that was identified with the tribe. The Babylonians, a similar thing before that. So you can see that there were pretty significant religions that had not yet, what I call in the book, decoupled. In 600 BC, though, there was a decoupling of religion, and when that happened, religion was able to propagate without respect to the tribe it came from. That was new. Even the Jews never figured that one out. So that's still a tribal religion. Judaism is still a tribal religion, if you will. Are you following where I'm going on this one?
Yeah, I get what you're saying.
So what happened was Zoroastrianism was able to propagate wildly and literally destroy other tribal religions as it became the religion of the Persian Empire. And then comes along later, other religions, Christianity and Islam, do the same thing. They decouple. Christianity is the first effort to decouple from Judaism. It's really Judaism decoupled from the tribe of Israel, and now it propagates wildly throughout the entire Western Hemisphere, West at the time, Europe and all. Islam does the same thing. Long after civilization. So you got to ask the question, which came first, civilization or religion? I think civilization came first. Religion comes along and has incredible power as a meme to propagate, and it just kind of rides along top of it. I talk about that in the concept of the civil religion in the book. And in chapter 3, I talk about how does religion infect cultures? How does religion infect entire societies? And it does, but it's not necessarily related to civilization. The two are totally different things.
Now, there's been a kind of a slightly different take on how to look at this. There's a debate between whether religion is a byproduct or a remnant. And I'm getting from what you're saying that you are more of the byproduct.
Yeah, probably a byproduct.
And that's the position that I've taken and a number of others. I know that, I can't remember which position he took on this, but Pascal Boyer has a couple of good books, actually, on the history of religion and how they were founded. It's an interesting study, and of course we don't have a time machine, so we can't go back and look. Something like religion, something that would be defined as mystical or, I was going to say something really bad, but I won't, has probably always been with us and ridden alongside. But it may be the case that the type of thought processes that go into building a civilization have as a byproduct religions and things like that. The fact of the matter is that none of us are perfect, and that's all it takes to get there.
Remember, in answer to your question, the basic fact is religion existed long before there was even civilizations in terms of tribal religions. But what we think of religion today is decoupled from the tribe. None of us see ourselves as a tribe that's identified with a specific religion. It's a very different animal, and but the two are not necessarily related.
You had another question, Steve?
I would agree with that.
You had another question?
Yeah, I just also, this is for all of you guys here. I was just wondering if you had any thoughts on maybe there's a direct relationship between Jesus and Buddha.
Direct? No.
Not that I know of. Although, you know, one of the lovely things about religion is that it just lets people kick their imaginations into overdrive. And I have heard some rather fantastic ideas about how this big gap we have in Jesus' life between, say, the age of 12 and 30. Someone came up with the idea that he went out east and spent some time in India and became a Buddhist. And I'm serious. I've heard that. So who knows? I think the sky's the limit there. So yeah, you know.
And evidently, I learned the other night the Baha'i faith tends to view Jesus and Moses and I believe Siddhartha and several others as enlightened prophets or whatever.
Yes.
And I was on a podcast with a group of guys in Australia, the Godless Biz, and they were telling me about an individual who had given up his Baha'i faith because he actually opened the Bible and read in Numbers, I think it's 31, where Moses orders the slaughter of the Midianites. And he said, well, how can we revere this person as an enlightened individual when he does this? And his faith crumbles from there. It's another example of religion holds up right up until the point where you really start to look into it. So. Is that it, Steve?
Yeah, that's all I had to ask. All right,
Great.
Thanks a lot for your time.
Thanks a lot. As a reminder, you can visit the ACA's website, www.atheist-community.org. You can email us by emailing tv@atheist-community.org. You can get more information at the website. There will not be a dinner after today's show because we ate before today's show, and we'll be back at our regular time at 4:30 next week. One of the other questions, or did you have something?
Well, I had something. I wanted to use an illustration. I think it helps people understand what the whole God virus thing, how it works. And we haven't really gotten there yet. I call it it's an experiment you can do. And that is sit down with your best religious friend and have a good discussion with them about their faith and just let them talk. And try to take notes while you're doing it. Ask them about Jesus and they'll tell you, well, Jesus went to heaven, Jesus rose from the dead, go through all those things and try to write them all down. And then go back a few days later, come back to your friend, transcribe that. And just change everything. Instead of Jesus, just insert the word Muhammad. And then read back the transcription of the little discussion you had using the word Muhammad here and Muhammad there, because Muhammad went up to heaven. Muhammad did a lot of the same things that Jesus did. And watch the expression on their face. And then ask them what's wrong. And they'll say, well, that's not right. And you can reverse this with your Islamic friends and have them do it and then just insert Jesus.
Just don't draw any pictures.
Yeah. What this helps everyone see is the power of the God virus, because it blinds people to the fallacies of their own religion. But most Mormons can tell you what's wrong with Islam. Most Christians can tell you what's wrong with Mormons, and so forth.
Yeah.
But when they look at themselves, they cannot tell you what the fatal flaw of their particular religion, because the God virus literally blinds them to that.
That was an important discovery in my life as well, because it wasn't atheist sites that gave me the best information when I was beginning my transition that I didn't even know was happening. It was other religions.
Yes.
You want to know what's wrong with Protestants, you go ask a Catholic.
Yes, right.
And you want to know what's wrong with Jews, you go ask a Muslim. And that's the way this works. Now, fortunately, we live in an age where there's much more information available quickly online. I can go, Google, whatever. And now we're getting secular viewpoints that are basically taking all these bits and pieces of information from everybody else, applying a little bit of rational thought, looking at all the evidence, and saying, look, this applies to all of you.
Yeah.
Which is exactly what you're talking about.
Yeah.
And that kind of realization is... It's one of the things that I try to do, because usually when somebody calls, I tend to ask questions at least to get started. Whether it's something simple like tell me what you believe and why, or we try to get down to the meat, because I'd prefer to discuss what it is that they're actually talking about. If you stop somebody and say, oh, no, you're talking about God and this, and this means this, you're definitely not going to get anywhere that way, because you're just talking past each other. So one of the reasons that I love, you know, the kind of Socratic method of asking questions is it gives you the opportunity for them to enlighten themselves.
Yes, right, exactly.
In their answers, you carefully craft the questions to the point where they are then forced to answer on their own behalf, and hopefully become aware of this, you know, confusing situation where this applies everywhere.
Yeah.
I could, you know, why is your argument that there must be an intelligent, transcendent being any more strong than an argument that there must be universe-creating pixies?
Yeah.
I mean, they're the same. You got to come up with something that distinguishes your claim from somebody else's.
But the Bible says that it's...
Yeah.
Now, it seems to me that the most obvious response that you would probably get, like the very first, you know, reaction to your ideas, that a Christian or a theist might give you, is it would probably pull out, well, what about all the good stuff religion does, right? I mean, you know, religion has, you know, is often praised, even by critics of religion. They'll say, well, at least it has the capacity to foster a sense of community in a culture, so that's a good thing that, you know, brings people together. The people might say, well, religious people do all sorts of charity work and benefit and stuff, and when Russell Glasser, the other host, some weeks ago,
He's out in the hall, so be
had
careful what you
a
say.
Baptist youth minister here, and one of the things that guy does is he went out to Darfur and did all this beneficial stuff for the folks. And so people, it seems to me, they'll immediately respond to this whole idea, well, religion's this horrible parasitic meme that is up to no good and it just doesn't care about you, it takes you, and they'll say, but what about all this stuff? And your response to them would be?
Well, I'd look at Sweden, Norway, Denmark, and say, wow, they hardly have any religion there, but they seem to do an awful lot of good things. Canada's not nearly as religious as us, but they seem to survive quite well and be very social and build communities and do good things. So how does religion enhance that? In one part of the book, I talk about the 5% solution. And it's a kind of interesting analysis. Look at where the money goes in religion. Now, if I give $1 to a church, where does that money actually go? If you analyze where it went to buying Bibles, paying preachers, building humongous churches, doing all sorts of things, none of which actually do any good for anybody except the God virus.
Yeah.
All right? If you analyze all that money, 5 cents out of that dollar goes to drilling a well in Darfur, or helping cure a disease in Kenya, or doing Haiti relief, earthquake relief. 5 cents. Now, in the Chamber of Commerce guidelines, they say a charity should not spend more than 40 cents out of the dollar on administrative work. 60 cents should go to doing good for someone somewhere. It should be drilling a hole somewhere. But religionists consider giving someone a Bible as doing good, building a church as doing good, preaching to the heathen out there as doing good. I don't count any of that. That's not doing anybody any good. Curing a disease is good. Helping teenage pregnant women deal with that issue is doing good. Drilling a well is doing good. 5 cents. Now, where's the good there? Why do we need religion to drill wells and give Haiti relief? Doctors Without Borders is doing that all the time.
Right.
And then they're not religious, and they're very clear about not siding with any religion.
Right.
I find little or no evidence that, on the whole, you're better off with religion. Little or none. Because I can give my dollar to United Way, I can give my dollar to Red Cross, and be darn sure 60 cents out of the dollar is going to do some good somewhere. If I give it to any religion, I don't care what religion it is, 5 cents is going to do good. Now, what's the rationale there? I'm a businessman. I make my living in the business world, and that doesn't make any sense anywhere.
Yeah.
So that's what I say to your religious people that say religion does good.
Right.
There's two other aspects of this that we can look at still within the context of the religion as a virus. And one is that, first of all, much of the good that gets attributed to religion is good that people are doing, irrespective of the religion.
Right.
And religion takes credit for it,
Right.
just as, you know,
Right.
it does some benefit for the religion,
Right.
therefore it keeps it. The other aspect is that we know that there are viruses that produce good benefits. Sickle cell anemia can protect from malaria.
right.
And so it should be hardly surprising that the religion virus would want to do some good, because if all it ever did was bad, then
Nobody
it
would
wouldn't
be
have
there.
survived.
Right.
Right,
It would kill off the person. Yeah,
yeah.
that's right. That's a
So
good
we
question.
got, that was really good. There's one other I want to touch on, but I got at least one caller on the line. We got Nick in Chicago.
Hi.
How you doing, Nick?
Good. I actually don't have a question anymore. You guys just discussed it.
Oh, well, what else? Just
Well, thanks for calling.
off the top of your head, what you want to throw anything out off the top of your head?
I guess if you could expand on the idea of, well, you were talking about the benefits of the God virus in terms of religion. What about in terms of non-religion God beliefs, people that are irreligious, which is who still believe in God, which is a growing group of people, I think.
You're right, and it's a growing group of people, and they're very slippery because whenever you say, well, religion does this or that, they'll say, well, I don't believe God has a religion, I just believe in God. You know, I think they're pretty benign. Some of them are kind of new agey kind of people. Others go to churches that are evangelical, and they say, well, I'm not religious, I believe I'm godly, kind of a thing. I kind of look at where they're coming from to assess whether this is a more parasitic or less parasitic belief in God. But there are some real parasitic God beliefs, and there's some that are more benign, if you will. I think the Wiccans, pagans, they believe in some kind of a supernatural, whether you call it God or whatever. They seem to be pretty darn benign, and I don't get too concerned about Wiccans and pagans here in our culture. But I do get real concerned about the evangelicals that say they're not religious.
And
they're voting.
Yeah,
They're voting with the ones who are.
Yeah.
most of the
they're on
time.
our school board.
Right, they're on a school board, right.
Yeah.
Which, as a reminder, this being an election year and the State Board of Education being of critical importance in Texas, and what happens in Texas is critically important to people outside of Texas, I encourage everybody to stop by sites like Texas Freedom Network to get information, good information about who's running, what they stand for, and what you can do to change the Texas State Board of Education.
TFNinsider.org is the blog to read.
They're doing a great job of keeping everybody informed.
And the thing, in relation to what Nick asked about, there are now, I think, these parasitic memes that are like the God virus, but that are of a secular nature. And these would be things that are starting to crop up in our culture now, like the anti-vaccination movement.
Yes. Oh, yeah.
And the 9/11 truth movement, and the birthers, and just whatever crap Glenn Beck talked about tonight, that he thinks, the Illuminati is going to come down in its UFO and
We're just going to assume that
sodomize
it
your
was
cat,
crap
and
because
then it
of
will
a
give
track
birth to an
record.
alien who will then, elect progressives to all the Congress, and then they'll take you over and they'll clone you and just, and it's on my blackboard, so it's true. So all of that kind of stuff, right? So this is now the same sort of irrationality.
Yeah.
That and I think that's really at the heart of all of this is this propensity for irrationality that people have.
Right.
This desire to believe things that are somehow self-validating. Because I don't see how a birtherism or whateverism helps the culture as a whole, other than to make the particular irrational person who believes in it feel validated and therefore smart and smug in that delusion. So.
But it is a meme that is propagating throughout the culture.
Yeah.
And it must have some...
So do you say that do you think it's similar in nature to the God virus? Or?
Well, it's less organized because they come and go. They're like fads, Religion's not as much like a fad because it stays for long periods of time. Although some religions are faddish. You get the Heaven's Gate group, they're all dead, so that's pretty much fad's gone.
Yeah. Kwanzaa is kind of going out of style. So.
It was so good at propagating itself that it killed off everybody who was in it. Thanks a lot for calling, Nick. I appreciate it.
Thank you. Bye.
But in those little phenomena, what you're seeing maybe is like the God virus in miniature.
In miniature,
it's like a little
right.
burst of...
There's always bursts. If you think about this, in New York State, upper New York State, where Mormonism got started, there were over 60 different religions that got started at the same time as Mormonism. It was called the Burned Out District in the early 1800s because everybody was getting a new religion every week. It was just everywhere, popping up everywhere. And some of these religions survived, some didn't. Mormonism is the one that survived. Out of all the religions that popped up in that 10 or 15-year time period, Mormonism. So it's like fads, popping and popping and popping. Well, that's not unlike what you're talking about here. They're just ideas. Hula hoop popped up and went crazy and died back down. But there are parasitic fads, fads that are really bad for the culture and the people. And I think you're talking about that.
Yeah. So, wow.
So, well, most definitely. There's one other question that we had talked about previously in email that I find so interesting, and I will admit that I just love to pick on this subject because it's a a horribly offensive thing that's going on, and that is this way that religion protects its own, particularly when we're talking about, for example, pedophile priests.
Right.
And how, not only are they obsessed with sex, but how the religion has taken that obsession with sex to both, from my point of view, create these monsters and then protect them.
Right. Well, in the book I talk about vectors, and a mosquito is a vector for a disease. A minister is a vector for religion. Look at Ted Haggard, for example. The man was bringing in millions of dollars and thousands of people. You protect that vector. That's an important component for the God virus. So the God virus can protect that very carefully. It takes over 8 years to get a priest up and running. 8 years, that's a lot of investment. So
I've had cars worse than that.
So if after 8 years, you're not going to just throw that person out, you're going to transfer him to the next parish. Even though he's molested half a dozen people, you're going to transfer him to this parish because you can't replace him. They're difficult to replace. Vectors are very expensive to develop, and they're very valuable to the God virus. Without vectors, the God virus dies. So that's when you look at it from a viral standpoint. Now suddenly you realize that's why they protect priests. That's why Ted Haggard got protected. That's why Jimmy Swaggart. That's why Benny Hinn has probably, those kinds of people have condemned divorce, and yet they get divorced. The early one, the woman Annie.
Jim and Tammy Faye Baker?
No. Way back in the 20s. Amy Semple McPherson.
I'm not that old.
Amy Semple McPherson in the teens and 20s was preaching horrible divorce. And what happened? She gets divorced. Did that stop her? No. She kept right on going. It never stops because you protect the vector. That's the most important thing.
Yeah. And then there's also, in protecting the vector, you're protecting the belief, right? Because
you're protecting the God virus.
Yeah, because because what the next step could be, if someone sees, say, a disgraced priest or something, the next step could then be questioning the belief, questioning the God virus.
Right.
Well, maybe there isn't this benign divine being out there taking care of all of this stuff if he's allowing horrible little children to be molested.
Sure.
So immediately you come out with let's keep this under wraps, and so it works on many levels in terms of that
multiple levels.
self-defense mechanism.
You're right. Yeah.
So we've got 2 callers, although I have no idea who they are, and we'll do what we can to possibly get to them before we're done. But before then, I want to go back to this, this website and program that you started. For those who missed the website earlier on, it's recoveringreligionists.com. This is an idea that I think we really need. You said there's already a number of groups that
20. We've got 20 groups across. We've got them from San Diego to New York City, from Atlanta, Georgia. We've got 3 in Kansas City, where I live, and they're just popping up all over. We've got a new one in Dallas, Texas. Only been going a couple months. We've got a new one starting in Albuquerque next month. They're just local people who are interested in helping get this going, and all they need to do is contact me. I will interact with them by email, by phone. I'll do whatever I need to do to help them get a group started in their area. And there's no major requirements needed. You don't have to be a shrink or anything like that. Just have to be somebody who wants to help people get out of religion.
We get a number of emails from people talking about, what do I do now? And please, give me some advice in this area, or how do I deal, I've been married to this woman for 20 years. We've got 3 kids, and all of a sudden I'm now a non-believer and she remains a believer. What do we do about our kids? Is our marriage going to survive? And I am single and have no kids.
So that's a Russell show.
Yeah.
I think, yeah.
So it's not always, I'm not always able to give the best advice. So it's great to know. There's the website at the bottom of the screen. You can visit that. If there's not already a group in your area start one. Contact them. The best thing you can do is get with other people who are in similar situations. I'm happy to give you at least my thoughts on those situations, which, one of the things that I've told people who have changed and are in that situation I described is that you have to own up to that. You changed the nature of the relationship. It doesn't mean there's fault there, but you have changed the nature of the relationship, and therefore you're going to have to do the extra work to try and make this work and figure out what you need to do. But that doesn't mean that you get to get preached at or walked all over forever. It's not like that you've been shackled into this and you're stuck. and having other people who have been in the similar situation to talk to, I think is a great idea. So thanks for starting that. And we hope to hear more from other groups starting around the country as well. We'll try and get at least one more call in real quick. We got Dave in Washington, D.C. How are you?
Hi. I'm glad I was actually able to catch the show here. The stream's been messing up tonight.
Sorry.
Yeah.
Two things. One for your guest, Dr. Ray. I was curious in looking over your summary. I'm afraid I haven't been able to get a hold of the book. Just been kind of reading internet summaries on it. Do you think that it's better for more attention to be placed on inoculation as opposed to going after the vectors? It just kind of seems pointless to be going after vectors, in my opinion.
Well, you know, if they raise their head and are a good shooting target, I think it's fine. What's wrong with calling Ted Haggard out over his hypocrisy, or Benny Hinn over his hypocrisy? I'm okay with that. I don't have any problem with it. Is that what you're asking?
Well, it doesn't seem to do anything. You know, they hide out, and then you get the same people coming back again.
Oh, I agree. It may not do anything, but I don't think we should stop calling people out on the hypocrisy that they've got. I have no problems with that. On the other side of your question, is there should we put our efforts into cure? I think there's a lot we can be doing, into prevention. A lot we can be doing there. Obviously, starting with your own kids or with people you know that you have some influence over. Those are a good place to start. Another place to go is, how about your local school district? Are they allowing inappropriate religious things going on in school? Because quite frankly, things like abstinence-only programs are a Trojan horse for the religions to get into your school system. So I would be questioning abstinence only all the way. That's a good way to prevent the God virus from getting in.
The whole creationism, teach the controversy, evolution.
Yeah, right.
And the irony of using the word Trojan when describing them is not lost.
So if you've been listening earlier, I talked about the guilt cycle. Abstinence-only programs are designed to teach adolescents to feel guilty about natural, normal behavior, not to address it rationally in terms of consequences and developmental stuff, but to just flat be guilty about it. Just say no to sex. That's not an answer for adolescents. What's the purpose of all that? It's to teach the guilt cycle so that the God virus is more effectively infected, and your government is paying for that strategy.
I got to let you go, Dave. Thanks a lot for calling. We are completely out of time because we lose our 90 seconds every time. I want to take this as an opportunity here. Thank you very much for being on the show. I enjoyed it thoroughly. And you're welcome back anytime you're in town. Thanks, Martin. Next week I'll be on with Jeff D. There's the people who made this show work despite being canceled and preempted and shifted to having everything break down. Thanks to everybody who stayed up late with us. We'll see you again next Sunday at 4:30 on Channel 16 and everywhere on the interwebs. Bye-bye.